Hello, everybody. Welcome to the conversation with the Planets Foundation. We're continuing a series of discussions relevant to the technology and the action of looking for life in the universe. And today, we're really lucky to have with us, let me see if I get this straight, Professor, Dr., Director General Pete Worden, who is I've known him for years as Dr. Worden and Professor Worden. He is a research professor at the University of Arizona. He's the chairman of the Breakthrough Prize Foundation. He was the director of NASA Ames. And last but not least, he was a brigadier general in the Air Force. And Pete has agreed to talk to us today about what's going on in a series of conversations, what's going on with the Breakthrough Foundation Prize Organization. So Pete, welcome to this conversation. We're really pleased to see you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Maybe we can start.
Very nice to have you.
And I'm sorry, team. Dr. Professor Svetlana Berdugina is joining us from Freiburg, Germany. And Kevin, surfer legend Lewis, is joining us. He's on the road. He's now surfing not surfing, but he's in Arizona. Thanks, Kevin, for putting this all together for the Planets Foundation.
Yeah, of course.
So, Pete, Breakthrough Foundation is doing all kinds of things, mostly related to looking for and even visiting life in the universe. Could you start off by just summarizing what you think some of the milestones for the Breakthrough Prize Foundation are over the next year or 2 years or 10 years to 20 years?
Well, precisely. Of course, the Breakthrough Prize Foundation began about 6 years ago with our principal sponsor, Yuri Milner, who started what are now the world's largest prizes in science we give out some $24 million of prizes a year. But about two and a half years ago, Yuri Milner, who is a physicist by background, talked to me about an initiative he wanted to mount, which is to really address, I think, mankind's fundamental question is about life in the universe is, are we alone? Right now, there's a couple different pieces of it. We've got parts of all of them going. Of course, the first piece we announced in London with Stephen Hawking on July 20th, 2015, where we are doing a revitalized SETI search, a search for extraterrestrial signals. The assumption there is that an intelligent species would be potentially visible far further into space than just life itself. So that's been ongoing. We've obtained information from right now 2 of the world's largest radio telescopes and one of the largest optical telescopes. We're using the Green Bank 100-meter radio telescope and the Parkes Australia 65-meter. We are also using the Lick automated planet finder. The second major initiative, which is the primary thing I think people would like to hear about, is the Breakthrough Starshot, which we announced on April 12th, 2016, the 55th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's historic flight. That was announced in New York with Yuri Milner and Stephen Hawking again. The objective here is to see if we can send a probe to the nearest star system, the Alpha Centauri system, and the key things there is we believe the technology is now advanced enough that we consider sending a very small probe using a very large laser using light pressure. The third major piece of this, we just announced the first effort in that, is really the search for, particularly in the Alpha Centauri system, is there a life-bearing planet in that system? We know based on very recent results from August of 2016 that there appears to be a Earth-sized planet in the habitable zone of the small star in the system, Proxima Centauri. Alpha Centauri is a 3-star system. And those are all going along very nicely. They're keeping us busy.
Absolutely.
Pete?
Yeah, so last time we talked with Pete Klupar, who is in charge of technical developments, and he told us about some engineering challenges in your work. And so, what do you see in the near future your science and engineers will be busy with?
Well, we've constituted an advisory panel that has about 30 world's experts on these topics, and where they've met a couple times. We've formulated three main sub-topics, and I think Pete talked about them. The first one is, can we build a laser that's powerful enough, which is 50 to 100 gigawatts, that can be affordable, that can be something that would be roughly the cost of the Large Hadron Collider at CERN or the James Webb Space Telescope. And the second major topic is, of course, you have to receive that energy and accelerate a star chip, which is with a whole spacecraft, or we call nanocraft, weighing less than a gram. The key problem there is building a light sail that can take that much power without tearing apart. The third problem, which we're going to address, is the ability to communicate back from the Alpha Centauri system. We will very soon, I think probably the next couple months, maybe sooner, announce a request for proposal. We've been discussing with key laser technology groups at universities and corporations and laboratories around the world for the laser development. The initial objective there is to see if we can gang together lots of small lasers, lasers that might be a few kilowatts or a few tens of kilowatts, so that they can operate in phase, meaning that they act like a single large laser. And we can get the light through the atmosphere, which means we have to correct for the atmosphere. I mean, ultimately, we need to build a kilometer square laser or larger. So that's the first key technology. We would hope to do some experiments with that within the next 2.5 years. So that's the first effort. And indeed, we're intending to spend probably 70 to 80% of the funds that have been allocated for the next number of years, 5 to 7 years, we believe, on that effort. About 4 or 5 months later, we expect to do a similar announcement for the sale, and then a few months after that, an announcement for the communications test.
So this will be already full-scale model you want to build from the beginning, or you build some smaller scale-down prototype?
Well, the first effort will be experiments. There'll be small-scale experiments. We hope to, in a couple of years, take a handful of the lasers that ultimately would build the system and demonstrate they can operate over tens or even hundreds of meters distance. Once we do that, we would hope to begin building, 5 to 7 years from now, and it'll probably take 5 or 10 years, a prototype, which would be potentially hundreds of megawatts of power and tens of meters diameter. That would be the sort of an interim system that we could test. And then assuming that everything goes well, there probably in about 15 years from now, we hope to begin construction of the full-scale system that hopefully would have in place in 20 to 30 years from now. So there's really a 3-phase program. We're in the research phase. That's roughly 100 million, we think, all privately funded. The next phase would be 500 million to $1 billion. Again, we expect that to be privately funded. Now, the final system, again, I mentioned those other instruments, is probably 10 billion or so. That we expect to be a public-private partnership.
All right, thank you.
And
well, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Svetlana.
No, you continue.
I was just going to say, so one of the questions I have is, how is Breakthrough's efforts to characterize the most likely nearby targets going? And can you talk a little bit about the characterization and your efforts to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course, the thing that everybody asks is there anything interesting in the Alpha Centauri system?
Sure.
Now, the good news, there's 3 stars. Of course, the bad news, there's 3 stars. And, you know, a lot of the, you know, analysis and theory in the past, you know, some experts say, well, there can't be any planets in binary star systems. Others say, well, it might be more likely to find planets the size of the Earth. In the case of Alpha Centauri, there's the two primary stars, Alpha Centauri A and B, that are more or less like our sun, maybe slightly older, that are orbiting in a 70-year period around each other. And then there's a third star, which is a small red dwarf, which is at great distances. It probably has a 10,000-year period around the other two. As noted, the third star does appear to have a planet that was detected this last year by radial velocity, where we look at the velocity of the redshift or Doppler shift of the star, and you're able to see an oscillation that indicates pretty clearly there's a planet that seems to be Earth size in what we call the habitable zone of the star. So that's an interesting point, although we'd really like to find planets around Alpha Centauri A and B that would be more like the sun. A few years ago, there was a detection that was claimed using the same radial velocity technique around Alpha Centauri B, but that has not been confirmed, and I think is generally regarded as probably not a real detection. So what we're doing is the first effort that we began funding, and this is with the European Southern Observatory, is to use the VLT, the Very Large Telescope, which is, to remind folks, is 4 8-meter telescopes that are grouped together and can in some cases be connected. We have one of the telescopes that has a infrared adaptive optics secondary. It operates at 10 microns. And by the way, 10 microns is kind of an ideal place to look for planets, because the planet is radiating infrared radiation appropriate to its thermal condition. In this case, 10 microns is at the peak of that. So it means its contrast relative to the star is the maximum. It's only a million times fainter than the star, whereas in the visible region, it's more like 1 billion times fainter. But we're going to observe that star. The second key thing on this telescope is what's called a coronagraph. So we can block the starlight, again at 10 microns, and we think we can directly image if there's a planet in the Alpha Centauri A or B system. So this is the first step, but we're also in discussions with other observatories, and particularly the Gemini South and the Magellan South, to do similar measurements. Those hopefully we can get several telescopes. The second major effort is if we detect a planet, you really need to know its mass if you're going to send a probe there or learn more about it. So we're considering a space-based capability that would be a small telescope, a small space telescope, 30 centimeters or 40 perhaps, that you would point at the Alpha Centauri A and B system. And the interesting thing about these two stars is they're close enough together that you can measure the position of one relative to the other. It's called astrometry. And if we observe these over 4 or 5 years, if there is a planet in the system, then you can measure the reflex motion of the star, and from that you can actually get the mass. So that's again, it's under consideration as a small space mission. The third thing, of course, is we're very interested in the next generation of telescopes that would be large enough that we could actually get a spectrum of these planets, including the Proxima Centauri planet called Proxima B. And that'll be available within a decade. If you get a spectrum of the planetary atmosphere, you could look for, of course, the obvious things to look for are water and oxygen, so that you can tell this thing looks like the Earth. But there may be other gases that would indicate different kinds of biology. But those are efforts we're looking at. We're in discussions with a couple different telescopes, such as the European Extremely Large Telescope and including some of the concepts this group has been looking at, the Colossus and other things. So this is still ongoing discussions. We haven't decided exactly what to do yet, but I expect the next year or two we'll be moving forward with some of these other projects too.
So, so it's absolutely true that what Breakthrough is doing is the biggest effort that humankind has attempted to try and reach out into the universe and understand our place, and as you said, understand why it is that we don't yet hear from our neighbors.
I would also add to most important as well. Sorry to interrupt, Jeff, but biggest and most important in my opinion.
Yeah, there's a growing realization that it's possible to think about a cosmic ecology, and the ecology that involves connections between exoplanets is something that exobiologists are just now beginning to think about, and I wouldn't say understand, but at least speculate on the possibility. Anyway, it's a big deal. It's a huge deal. And
yeah, thank you. I mean that's indeed. We're very excited that we believe that again, using private resources, we're hopefully igniting the next step. I've always been really excited. Ever since I was a kid, a long time ago, about the nearby stars. I've been quoted as saying that our own solar system is kind of boring, and that's only because that right now we only know of life on one planet. I really hope that life is everywhere in the universe and that we'll find intelligent life. It's sort of interesting. I know that a lot of folks would say, well, we've looked, haven't seen any intelligent signals. When we looked at this a couple of years ago, it's interesting that, yes, we haven't seen very many signals, but we really haven't tried very hard. We're going to try to do a systematic survey of the million nearest stars. We now have much more capability with both the availability of larger radio and optical instruments, and quite frankly, the ability to filter through data and extract very weak signals from that data. So, I think this is the next big step in the study of life in the universe. But I want to emphasize we're working very closely with existing efforts. Every one of these instruments we're working with are funded. In fact, even in most cases, the majority of funding is from governments and other private sources. So I'd like to look more like we're leveraging other efforts. Pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea, of course, $100 million in the grand scheme of things is the seed money. It's just the start of all of this. I wanted to ask you how you felt it was going. The word you used was ignite, right? And it's the right word, right? This idea and this concept will go viral eventually. People will catch on. We'll wake up some morning to news that within 10 light years or 20 light years of us, there's life, and that's going to change life on the Earth in fundamental ways. How is it going in getting interest from other potential motivating forces for this human mission?
Extremely well. Of course, I'm spending probably most of my time on airlines, but part of that is because folks have invited us to talk to some really distinguished fora. For example, in January I went to two of them. One was a Futures Congress in Chile, which had several thousand people attend. It's a major Latin American and even global forum on new technology, and I gave one of the keynote lectures on that. I just got back yesterday from Israel, the 12th Elon Ramon conference, which is the major conference in Israel for space programs. I've been invited to a number of others over the next few months. So we're seeing a lot of really good excitement. We're seeing a lot of discussion in the both technical and popular press. There was an article that just came out here the last few days in Nature about our Starshot effort. A very good article. I'd commend it to people. There was one a few weeks ago in Scientific American. We're seeing results coming out. I mentioned the Proxima B planet. Folks have been in touch with us ahead of time. There are, without giving too much away, there's more exciting things coming out. I think just a few days ago, there was a paper by a couple European experts in the Astrophysical Journal Letters about a manner to actually use light sail technology to stop and orbit the Alpha Centauri system. Of course, it takes longer, but we're seeing the thinking really advance in these areas. So I think it's already, really taking off. We're having a major conference at Stanford University here in a few weeks in mid-April, and a lot of excitement about discussing the Proxima B planet. The key questions we're going to look at is, what can you observe on this planet from our vantage point from the Earth and space systems in the next decade or so. Second is, what do we put on the star chip to in addition to cameras, to figure out whether there's life in the Alpha Centauri system. And the third one is a major question of how do you really look specifically on that planet? We now know that it's could be Earth-like, to see if there's any evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. So this is becoming a big topic, and we're quite gratified about it.
Yeah, I think you're fanning the flames, and I think we all we all want to do that, make it go viral. I think we have just a couple more minutes. Svetlana or Kevin, did you want to chime in with anything?
Yeah, I had a quick question. Pete, earlier you were talking about, sometimes people say that we've been searching for a long time and haven't found anything yet, and you're also talking about a revitalized SETI search. So is it just, bigger and better radio telescopes, or, better data processing? Can you talk just a little bit about the revitalized SETI search that you're doing?
Well, it's really all of the above. And of course, one of the first things is we're now using the world's largest radio telescopes. In the past, it was very difficult to get time to directly search for alien signals. There was a lot of folks that didn't regard it as top-rate science, and I think that's changing. Part of it is because we're able to frankly, work with these observatories and offset some of their overall operating costs so that we can get time. But we also, in October, we signed an agreement with the Chinese National Observatory to use the data from the 500 meter, which is the world's largest radio telescope, just now coming online. We're in discussions with the Square Kilometer Array, Meerkat, the first phase of an even larger radio telescope being built in South Africa. So it's really access to these new instruments, and the biggest instruments. But second, it is the ability to handle the data a lot better with new methods. We're able to filter through and get much finer resolution. We're able to process a lot more data, and we're able to use new methods. Interestingly enough, I thought one of the coolest things was Neil deGrasse Tyson, about a year and a half ago, asked somebody I wouldn't have thought as a SETI expert, Edward Snowden, what he thought about this thing we just announced, and he said, well, you ought to assume that the aliens would encrypt their data. And unless they were sending a beacon to us, that's probably exactly what would happen. So we're now talking to people that are experts at decrypting data. Needless to say, most of those people have day jobs working for governments, but there's a lot of very, very powerful new techniques to determine is there information content and so forth. So I think all of these things we're getting a lot more capability. But we've also really never done a systematic survey across broad frequencies of the nearest stars. I mentioned 1 million stars. That's only 1,000 light years out. So for the first time, we'll be able to look at everybody that might have figured out there's a civilization on Earth. The first evidence of a civilization on Earth that experts tell me is 2,000 years ago. The Romans cut down all the trees and burned them in Spain to smelt silver. That made noticeable changes to the atmosphere. It was the first evidence of industrial effort. So it would take 1,000 years to go out, and then if somebody wanted to send a signal back. So I think we're just now starting to do a really thorough, both from telescope time, data handling, and a scientific perspective.
Yeah, there's this great graphic I need to find, but it basically shows what we've searched with SETI so far, and then what's left to search, and it's just astonishing, like how little.
Basically, essentially everything.
Yeah, exactly.
and we're starting to look at optical. We have a study that to look at how do we do a all sky transient survey. I mean, you know, if somebody didn't mean to send us a signal, but you were just in the way of. In fact, one of the most interesting things, if somebody else is using lasers to push stuff around like we want to do, we would look for a transient signal. So probably in the next year or two, we'll mount all sky optical survey.
Cool. Cool.
Yes, I also want to mention this, ask about the targets in the nearby universe, let's say nearby space. You said solar system, perhaps boring because there is no life anywhere else we see, but maybe we missed something. And with your probe, with your prototype probe, would be quite exciting to do explorations within days of a solar system.
Yeah, precisely. I think that one of the more interesting things is the technology we're developing will give us access to our solar system and really look at the objects in the Kuiper belt. We're now finding that, you know, Pluto is a Kuiper belt object, that it has a large ocean. If you think that life arises in oceans, most of the oceans are in the outer solar system or beyond. So nobody has ever visited the Oort cloud, and there's probably a lot of large objects there. So the ability to send things, you know, because we're trying to go send them at 20% light speed, but even the prototype can send things like we're talking about hundreds of kilometers a second. So it really gives us access to look for life in our own solar system much better than we were able to before.
Also, too,
yeah, this would be exciting, and it's quite not too far from in time, I believe.
Oh yeah, this is, you know, that if we get a prototype built in 10 or 15 years, so it's very exciting.
Yes.
All right, Pete. I know we've just scratched the surface of what's going on. I hope you'll take a few minutes and come back and talk to us in this series. This is tremendously exciting, and we know it's important. It could easily change life the way we know it here on Earth within our generation, and that's what we're all rooting for.
Well, thank you, and I really want to commend what you're doing with the Planets Foundation. There's all sorts of exciting things you guys are doing, and hopefully we and others can help make that real.
All right, onward.
Thank you for doing this.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks. Thank you.